Welcome back to Building Subtext, the weekly video series where I go over all the new features in Subtext, the story structure app for creative geniuses. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and write a Western. I'm going to go with reason just because Westerns are pretty reasonable. What was the one I wanted to do this is an episode of Black Mirror. It's a great story. Complete stories are not just for movies, and you'll notice like Barry, there's a complete story over the entire first season. You can have an episode, which is just a complete story in and of itself. In this episode, keep focusing on being forceful towards something and you can make a stand. I'll do a Western. Some sheriff comes to town, total basic idea. No idea really where I'm going to go with it. I just like the idea of focusing on being more forceful towards something and you can make a stand. I'll take that one. Here you can get a lot more detail. As I said, there's a lot of detail that goes into a complete structure. But we're not going to deal with any of that. We're only going to deal with these like top surface level sort of things before you dive down into it. So I'm just going to build a story here. What drives the structure of the premise? It's about reason. What is the point of this premise? Well, the point of this premise is to maintain a certain way of being. Keep going for what it is that you want, and then you can stand up for something. Does the main character flow with the plot? So there's an energy of flow through this premise, and then it ends in triumph. That seems pretty good to me. I like the character elements, and I like this plot idea of making a stand, especially since that's what my Western is going to be about, this brand new sheriff that comes to town. So I'll just build a story, and what Subtext does is it takes that premise and builds an entire narrative around it. But we're only going to look at the basic parts of it. We're only going to look at the essential elements of it. Subtext is a place to develop your story and to get it so you know what it is that's actually going on, and then you go write it somewhere else. So this is like the exit out of Subtext. Coming up here, and we'll just jump to the through lines here. Based on this premise here, keep focusing on being forceful towards something and you can make a stand. These are the four main through lines that will happen in that story to make that premise something that is actually proven to the audience. It gets broken down into plot, which is what most people understand. A secondary one is the main character, which gives more of a personal point of view on that conflict. Then there's the influence character, who is somebody who actually challenges the main character to grow a certain way. And then we have relationships, and relationships are a counter to the plot. So you have your plot, which is the logical good guys versus bad guys. And then there's the emotional counterpart to that, which are the actual relationships in the story. So plot is just a logical version of relationships, and relationships are an emotional version of relationships. What you'll see here is that based on this premise of keep focusing on being more forceful towards something you can make a stand, it broke those four through lines into four different ways of looking at the same thing. So the plot is going to be looking at the current situation and circumstances. I'm not sure exactly what that's going to be yet, but something about the current situation is messed up and the new sheriff has to fix it. The main character is looking at it personally from a slightly different point of view. It's the same sort of conflict, but you're looking at it from different points of view. You know, the thing about you don't understand somebody till you walk a mile in their shoes. This is when you get to walk in the main character's shoes. And while everybody's going to be dealing with the current situation, the main character is going to be dealing with gathering information or experience. Maybe they send new sheriffs to a town where they can learn what it's like to be a sheriff. Maybe he's fresh out of sheriff school or whatever. I'm thinking like late 1800s. And then when he's there, he's going to be challenged as he's trying to learn all this stuff by an influence character who I'm not really quite sure of, who's going to create all kinds of conflict by coming up with an idea. While the main character is trying to gather information, gather this experience of what it's like to be a sheriff, this other person is just coming up with all kinds of ideas, which really interferes with the way that the main character is able to deal with that stuff. And then finally, the fourth way that gives you the last version of looking at all the different problems so that you can see everything from all these different points of view and gives you a complete feeling of it are the relationships, which are just going to be about considerations. It's not so much that they're going to be about them, but that the relationships grow through considerations. So through a new friendship, actually like thinking about something, or a new romance thinking about something. To begin, you come up here and you just click on illustrate. Subtext goes out and grabs a random illustration of the current situation and circumstances, which you can see here. A short way of understanding what that means is just the word present. So the present situation is something that's messed up. It's kind of out of control. It's creating conflict. Here, existing for something, this is an illustration of what it means to have to deal with conflict that's about the present situation. That one's a little bit off. I'm not really sure if that's something that I want to go for. Knowing how things are nowadays. Actually, that feels really good. So these are all different versions of present, all different ways of looking at the present moment as a source of conflict. So now you'll notice a change. Illustrate knowing how things are nowadays as a source of conflict for everyone. Let's see if I can come up with something. Okay, so what I came up with was everyone in this Western town just assumes that life is terrible and that there really isn't anything you can do about it. This cynical attitude breeds a lot of contempt where no one really stands up for their fellow citizen. Knowing how things are nowadays, if you try to intervene, you're going to get shot. So better him than me. So it's going to be all these people in town who, hey, that's just the way things are. The bank gets robbed, bounty hunters, and they come and take people, livestock, we're dying. It's not a really fun place to live, but really, there's nowhere to go. It's just a really sad sort of place. And so there's this level of apathy. We'll just say a town called Apathy, Nebraska. So that's what's creating all the conflict in there. And it's all coming from having to deal with the present. Like, what are we going to do? So that's what the plot is going to be. So the good guy's going to come, maybe the bad guy is somebody who's continuing this idea. He's making money off of it or whatever. He likes the status quo, and this sheriff is going to end up changing the status quo. But maybe he just comes to it anyways, and he's like, well, this is just like a step I have to get through before I can be a sheriff at a real town. So even he will have an aspect of apathy to him. So then what I'll do is I'll come down here and I'll talk about the sheriff. He was all about gathering information and gathering experience. And I really liked the idea that he was just on this mission to gather experience, training someone. So he's just in there, it's all about training. And the idea of the illustration is to get it away from the cold-hearted structural concern of learning. Like, this is the subtext of this story point of the main character here, that the overall summary of it. What lies underneath is this concept of learning, a method of approaching life's conflicts through learning, and that's what's actually creating the problem. But that's not a very sexy thing to write a story from. So what you write from is this idea of training someone. Illustrate training something as a source of conflict for the main character. That one I'll just write up real fast. Okay, so Hank Weathers shows up to Apathy to complete his initial training as a sheriff. He's just there to gather experience for what it takes to protect the town, collect his badge, and get the heck out of there. The problem is, when you go into a situation for just a specific purpose, you often miss out on learning something new that could eventually make you a great sheriff. So he just goes into it with this kind of negative attitude. He's just there to gather experience for what it takes to protect the town. Let me just finish my 3 weeks here. I'm in, I'm out, and that's it. But along the way, he's going to find out that, whoa, the real learning is keeping yourself open to different things that can happen, things that could show up and actually make a difference. It's great because this is the plot here. We have this sort of apathetic thing, and then I have a personal view of it, which is about going in to actually do something to gather information, gather experience. But when you go into it with that sort of apathetic attitude, you're not really going to get anything out of it. And who's the one that's actually going to challenge the sheriff to kind of rise up? That would be the influence character. So I have no idea who this is. I would assume a ranch hand's daughter, which sounds really just typical, like that's been done a million times. I could just steal from Westworld and it's one of the prostitutes at the local bar. That's not very original either. So I'm going to make it a female dance hall instructor. So she's just there and maybe she puts on dances in the Western. I'm purposely choosing something that's really wacky and out there. And she's all about coming up with an idea. Let me see if there's something else. Coming up with a buzzword and gaining a new insight. All right, tolerating the haters. Okay, so Linda is a dance hall instructor in Apathy, Nebraska, the absolute worst place in the world to try and convince people that dancing is an important part of life, yet she can't help herself. She creates conflict for everyone, particularly Hank, by constantly tolerating everyone's put downs as a means of inspiring them to express themselves artistically. She's there creating all kinds of trouble because Hank just wants to get through the whole thing, but yet she's got this like really excited sort of, oh, everything's going to be great, trying to get people to get excited about life. And that's like super annoying. I started out just wanting to write a Western. Now that's kind of this like funny, cynical sort of Western thing that's coming out. It could be anything. This is just me personally. Subtext is based on some really complex algorithms and really deep narrative theory. But when it comes to actually going through and illustrating the different story points here, the artist behind it, I'm currently the artist behind it, is going to come through and come into the actual storytelling. This is just structure. This is just a way of organizing my particular way of seeing the world. It's being organized around the present and around learning and around conceiving, which they're all tied together. They all kind of sound like the same thing, but looking at it from different points of view. And they're all in service of this narrative here of keep focusing on being forceful towards something you can make a stand. Like you can see that playing out with Linda. She just keeps focusing on it to make a stand, but also Hank, he's going to be forceful and maybe he's just going to make a stand about like, hey, I'm just going to do my job and I'm going to get out of here, and maybe that's enough. The typical thing would be, oh, Linda's the one that changes Hank to finally see the light, but maybe there's a way to work it so that both of them just being forceful in their own way, doing their own thing. He's just like, maybe sometimes you are just supposed to get the job done. Maybe that's it. Maybe you're not supposed to do anything else besides that. And now finally the relationship, which in original dramatic theory, it always has to be between the main character and the influence character. Subsequently, in the past couple of years, with subtext and narrative first, we found out that it's just relationships. It doesn't have to be just the main character and influence character. But I think in this case, I do want to make it between Hank and Linda. You know, maybe they're forced together in the beginning, but then they fall into a romance by the end of it. So here I'll illustrate their romance, considering the meaning of their life so far. So that'll be great. All right. Okay. So just based on this idea of this illustration, how's their relationship going to grow through considering the meaning of their life so far? These people, they're probably middle-aged. Hank and Linda are forced to work together at first. So she's his escort for the 3 weeks he's in town. She'll show him around. She knows everything. And she's like really happy and spunky and super into it. And he's just like, oh, I got to get through this. But they find themselves becoming quite attracted to one another the more and more they sit down and consider the true meaning of life. So anytime when they're just alone and there's like a chance for them to grow together, to get closer together, and maybe also as they each do their jobs, it's like, really, do you really think life is about dancing and expressing yourself artistically? What does that even mean? Why would you think that's the reason why you've been put on this earth? And, of course, then he's just about doing a job. The arguments back and forth, is it expressing yourself artistically? Is that the meaning of life? Is it about doing your job? Maybe life is completely meaningless. And in that spark, so again, this is my own personal thing. Maybe in that spark of seeing how meaningless life is, maybe they find a way to grow closer to each other by just considering, well, maybe it's about the people that you spend life with or spend your life with. And that's coming from conscious. That's the method, that's the narrative method that's underneath, that's underlying this particular story point. And you can see how that completes the entire narrative. It makes it a complete story. Now, I have a really good idea of what this Western is all about. I came into it not knowing anything. All I knew was I connected with this premise here. Keep focusing on being forceful towards something and you can make a stand. And then at the end, maybe they get so close and they both are forceful on how meaningless life is and they can stand up against the town, stand up against apathy, and maybe they go off into the sunset together. I have a complete story there that now I can write and pitch. And it's all just based on these four through lines. If you can go in and pitch these four aspects, these four different points of view, anybody that hears it is going to have a really good idea of where you're coming from and what kind of story you're trying to tell. And you can save yourself a lot of searching, a lot of like going down this alley and going down this alley. Let me try this story point. Let me try this. And rewrites after rewrites. You can just really quickly build this. I don't know, was it been like 15 minutes that I've done this? 15 minutes here, get a really great idea. I've got a really funny story. It says structure built from Black Mirror, but I would just call this Apathy. Might even make it Apathy, Kansas. That sounds funnier. So, Apathy, Kansas. That's the name of my Western here. To make it more obvious as to what all this work is about, because not everybody's going to be watching these videos. You do all this work here, and it's still a little bit disconnected from what it is that you're actually supposed to write. There's still a lot of stuff attached to it. So what I did, in the same way that I have the treatment down here, once you work through all the different acts and all the different story points, and you can have a treatment to write from, I went ahead and thought it'd be great just to put these plot summaries in here. And the summary view is just that. It's a summary of all that work that I just did. But it removes all the esoteric structure stuff. It's not as busy. It's really just your story. This is the entire story right here. So I have the plot summary, the main character summary, the influence character summary, and the relationships. And you can go in here and change stuff. Like I said, back here, I changed the story from Apathy, Nebraska to Apathy, Kansas. And this is something that's much more closer to what it is that you're used to when you're actually writing a story. You don't have all that structure. Again, the purpose of subtext is to come in here, figure out what it is that your story is about, work through it with various different story points so that you can get a good idea of what it is that you're going to be dealing with, and then just jump into the summary here, make sure it all works together, make sure it all flows together, and then you can just dump it out, just put it into something else. And you have three different formats. You have Markdown, which is a really popular way to write on the web. Fountain, it's a screenplay version of Markdown. And then just basic text. And you can take that into anything. If you have Highland or any of those other Fountain screenwriting apps, you can just take this, bring it in there, and you can actually just start writing your script with this summary here. If you have Scrivener or anything else, you probably want to do text, although I think it also takes Markdown. Whatever your writing program of choice is, do all this work in subtext and then get out. Don't stay in here and go over and over and over all the different things until you do get to a place where you are stuck, or you want to develop more, maybe just the main character through line, or maybe just their relationship. Then you would come back in and actually go through the various different beats that are actually in their relationship and see how that evolves over the course of the entire story. Reading through it again just to make sure before I go ahead and print it out. Everyone in this Western town just assumes that life is terrible and that there really isn't anything you can do about it. This cynical attitude breeds a lot of contempt where no one really stands up for their fellow citizen. That sounds good. So I just added, the mayor loves the fact that no one has enough energy to actually make changes to his town. The bad attitude keeps everyone calm and non-responsive and keeps his fortune well protected. Until, of course, Hank Weathers comes to town. And then Hank Weathers shows up to Apathy to complete his initial training as a sheriff. He's just there to gather experience for what it takes to protect a town. Collect his badge and get the heck out of there. The problem is, when you go into a situation for a specific purpose, you often miss out on learning something new that could eventually make you a great sheriff. And he learns that from very impulsive, firing woman. And that's Linda. Linda is a dance hall instructor in Apathy, Nebraska, the absolute worst place in the world to try and convince people that dancing is an important part of her life. Yet she can't help herself. She creates conflict for everyone, particularly Hank, by constantly tolerating everyone's put-downs as a means of inspiring them to express themselves artistically. Everyone just wishes Linda go away. And then finally, so these two birds of a feather, Hank and Linda are forced to work together. First, as she's his escort for the 3 weeks that he's in town, but they find themselves becoming quite attracted to one another the more and more they sit down and consider the true meaning of life. Is it expressing yourself artistically? Is it about doing a job? Or maybe it's neither, and it's really just about having fun with the people you spend your life with. Brilliant. Complete story. But what I would do then is I would export this, take it into whatever sort of writing app that you're using, drop the influence character and relationship, the headings, because no one's really going to connect with that, and then put it all together in a one-page synopsis, and you've got your entire story. And in fact, if you're going to take advantage of the Subtext concierge service, where I actually help you work through your story, like actually go through and show you how to use subtext to work through the different story beats, this is a requirement. You have to come in here and go through these 4 points so you have a really good idea of what it is. So when we sit down and talk, we're not kind of guessing at what your story's about. You've actually had a chance to think through it. You've had a chance to think through the plot, through the main character, the person that challenges the main character, and then, of course, the relationships. It might not be 100% accurate, but at least you've started that thinking process. And that's what subtext is all about. It's just to get your thinking gears into gear so that you can write a really, really great story. So that when I sit down at night and I'm going to choose what story I'm going to watch on whatever streaming service, I don't have to be disappointed because there's no actual story, because there's missing pieces. If everybody would just do this, we would all have really great, complete stories that say something meaningful. And that's my hope with Subtext. That's why I'm actually doing all this work. And if you have any questions about anything that I've gone over in this video, feel free to leave a comment or email me. You can get in touch with me whichever way you want. There's nothing I love more than helping writers connect with what it is that they want to say. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.